How's it going, guys? I'm Connor from Running Warehouse, and we're back with episode 6 of the Running Warehouse Connection, our new weekly show where we bring the running community together to talk about anything and everything running related. Now, in the past couple of weeks, we've had on some track runners, we've had on some shoe geeks, we've even had on some marathoners, but this is the first time we had an ultra marathoner, and this is possibly our most accomplished ultra athlete in the history of the sport. We have Courtney Dauwalter. Courtney, how are you doing today?
Hi, thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here. And now my background isn't necessarily in the ultra marathon. I kind of live in the track and the marathon world, but over the past couple years, I've started to find myself keeping up with a lot of the big ultras. And when I check the results, your name is always up at the top. Now, when we look at Western states, UTMB, Moab, Run Rabbit, you're always up there and you've pretty much won them all. Are there any major ultras currently that you haven't won yet and you have your eyes set on in the future?
Oh, there's so many cool races out there. And I'm glad to hear that you're starting to get into ultras and following along. Maybe by the end of this conversation, you'll be signing up for one.
Well, I won't commit just yet, but I think you might be able to convince me. There are so many great ultras, and one that I know you haven't won is the Big's Backyard Ultra. Now, that's gained a lot of attention the last few years, and for a good reason. It's a crazy race. Can you talk a little bit about what that race is and what made you want to do it?
Yeah, so the format of that ultra is really unique where it's a last person standing race. So there's no set distance or time that the race goes for. It's just until no one can keep going anymore. And it's on a 4-mile loop, and you have to do 1 lap every hour. When you finish your lap, you have the rest of the hour to rest, to eat, to, change your shoes or whatever. And then at the top of the next hour, everyone starts again. So you're never like gapping the field. You're always doing the same loop basically all together. And the only way for the race to end for you is for you to not make it back in an hour, or if you just call it quits and you don't go out for the next lap.
Wow. So that it's very much different than your standard ultra, and it leads to potentially a much longer race than, you can go on for hundreds and hundreds of miles. Can you talk about some of the strategies that you might use in this race just because it is so different?
Yeah, well, I can try. I've only done it once, but I'm so intrigued by the format and what it can mean for, finding your own potential. When nothing is telling you you have to stop, there's no finish line, there's no, buzzer at the end of the time limit or whatever. Like, you just can find out for yourself what that limit looks like. So the one year I did it, there were a lot of strategies. Some people, right after that first 4-mile loop, they're sitting down and they're resting their eyes already. So every single hour. And that the miles add up slowly. When you're only going 4 miles an hour, you finish a day and you've done barely any mileage, really. Like, so people are resting a lot. Sometimes people play head games with each other and like try and act perkier than they really feel, because it's all about staying strong in your head and believing that you can be the last person standing.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about head games. Is that something that for you, are you trying to show other people that you're stronger, or are you mainly focusing on yourself? Because I imagine it kind of depends on the runner on your different approach you're going to take.
Yeah, for sure. I was not playing head games. I was just trying to keep showing up to the line at the start of the hour and going out for my loop. But it's fun. It's a really cool community feel because you are all together. And a lot of times in these ultra marathons, you'll end up miles or hours apart from every other runner just based on the terrain and the distance of the race. So it's a cool way to spend a lot of time with the ultra running community and then, find out for yourself what's possible.
Yeah, that to me, that race just sounds insane. And when I look at how long some of these records and how long people are out there running, it just shocks me that you could even go that long in this competition. But with runners getting stronger, mentally tougher, just more experience, what are the limits to this race? How far do you think someone could theoretically go?
Oh, I hope we find out. So the farthest this format has lasted is 283 miles. And that was only because so the last person standing only does one more loop than the second to last person, and then the race is over. So they don't get to keep finding their limit. Once the second to last person is done, they just do one more and then the race is called. So there's a lot of questions, like what is possible if you have more than two people, or at least two people who can keep pushing on. I think it absolutely can break 400 miles, which it's 100 miles a day. So that would be 4 days nonstop of 4-mile loops.
Wow. That's insane. Now, when we look at other ultramarathon, you got guys like Killian, you've got guys like Max King. A lot of these ultra runners have their specialties where they kind of shine, and the Big's backyard is a little bit different. What do you think the number one like attribute that's going to show that a runner is going to be successful in a race like that?
That one I think is hugely mental. So staying strong in your head and continuing to believe that you can do another lap is really important, because you don't have to be moving very fast to finish the loop in an hour.
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those weird things where you got to just push yourself to where you never thought you could go. So, well, now let's move on. You've been running these ultra marathons for years. You're a veteran in the ultra marathon running community. But how did you originally get started? Was this something that interested you at an early age?
No, I didn't know it existed. I grew up in Minnesota running cross country and track, and I loved endurance sports, and I loved the training that went into that. And then after college, I decided to try a road marathon. And in my head, a road marathon, 26.2 miles, sounded like there was no way I would survive it. Like the morning of my first road marathon, I sent goodbye text messages to all my friends and family because I thought I would die out on this 26.2 mile course. And when I finished it, I was so surprised, and I loved it so much that it kind of piqued my interest as far as what else there was and what else I could survive that sounds impossible.
Yeah. Now that's interesting to hear, because when we think about the accomplishments that you've ran over the years, you would have thought that you just had success and have been doing this for so long. Now, for someone who might be interested in their first ultramarathon, what would you suggest? How would you suggest they go about that? And is this something that's going to take years and years of prep before you do your first one?
I think it depends a lot where you're starting from, but everyone can do an ultra marathon. So the shortest ultra marathons are around 50K usually. That's 31 miles. And, that's just a little bit more than a traditional marathon. So if you put your mind to it and, patiently build up that base so that you can add on those miles like that, anyone can do a 50K for sure. So finding the course that kind of fires you up and makes you want to patiently build the base is the most important, I think.
Yeah. And when you talk about building the base, I think some of your base, maybe from an early age, could be attributed to Nordic skiing. I know that was something you did when you were younger. Can you talk about how that played an impact on kind of your endurance sport pursuit? And also, is that something that you continue to do and race in?
I Nordic skied in high school. So I raced it in high school, and then I went and raced it in college as well at the University of Denver. And I think it played into where I am today in a huge way for the cardio, for the endurance piece of it, but also because I had one of the most fantastic coaches that I've ever experienced on my high school cross country ski team. So he taught us a lot about the pain cave and how when you feel like there's nothing left in the tank, there's always a little bit more. And learning that was so valuable for me in moving forward. And I use it now in all of my ultras. So it's a pretty cool connection. I don't race it anymore, but here in Colorado, I definitely use it as cross training in the winter.
Awesome. Now, when you talk about having a great coach, I think that's always an important aspect to anyone running competitively. Do you currently have a coach, or are you self-coached?
I do not have a coach. Yeah.
Okay. So
I wouldn't call it self-coached either.
So maybe you take some advice from some people, you take some advice from yourself, but overall, you kind of have a more natural training approach. Is that?
Yeah, I think for me, I like just figuring it out, and that's ultra running to me. Is it's this big puzzle, and I get to try and put it together as best as possible. So the training for me is, a giant puzzle piece that I am, playing around with, but mostly I just listen to my body and, take past experiences and mistakes that I've made to try and keep improving what I'm doing so that I can move more efficiently on the trails.
Well, now when we look at some of the top track runners, some of the top marathon runners, a lot of them are running anywhere from 80 miles a week upwards to somewhere around 120 miles a week. For you as an ultra marathoner, what is your weekly mileage looking like? And then how high can you get up to?
I average 100 miles a week, mostly on single track, right here in Golden, Colorado. The highest I've done is probably, so not including a race week, but just a training week. I think the highest I've gotten to is maybe 130s, mid 130s probably.
That's impressive. Very impressive. I know for myself, even when I start getting close to 100, my body feels like it's starting to break down. So I can understand where you're coming from when you're doing that type of mileage.
Well, our miles probably look pretty different.
Well, that's a good point. And for someone like me who's on the track, I do a lot of speed work. I do a lot of intervals, a lot of tempo runs. For someone like you in the ultramarathon world, I imagine you do some sort of speed work, but it's different. How do you go about doing your speed and maybe some strength sessions?
Yeah, I'll do speed work, but often it's on trails. So a hill on a trail section that I like, I'll do repeats on that, or a tempo of, a long grind or uphill section that I like to just get after. I don't do a lot of time on the track though, and I don't do a ton of those intervals on the roads even. So trying to keep it pretty specific for trail stuff. And then strength, I've been just focusing on a lot of core and like hips and glutes and kind of those stabilizer muscles to maximize efficiency out on the trails.
Yeah. And that makes sense because a lot of your focuses are geared towards the trail races, but we are starting to see a lot of record attempts of like 100 miles and stuff done on the track. Is that something that interests you, or is your heart really set on the trails?
I love the trails, but I've competed in 24-hour races that are held on a 400-meter track. So I've done plenty of laps on a track.
How do you deal with that mentally? Because I mean, just running a 2-mile or a 5K for a lot of runners is just the most boring thing on a track. And when you times that by 50, I mean, that's got to be some crazy mental toughness.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I mean, it's so simple what you're doing that you can turn off your brain as far as navigating and thinking about your foot placement. And you get to have then all this brain space suddenly to think about, whatever, or to try and stay mentally tough in it. So it's a really cool mental challenge to continue to just keep lapping a 400-meter track for 24 hours. And that draws me to those races. It's no longer scenic or beautiful, but it's unique in the challenge it provides.
Yeah.
Usually the format is also where every 4 hours you get to turn around and go the other direction. So that's a pretty exciting time in those races.
Little change of scenery. No.
Yeah, it's like this huge deal. You feel like it's so crazy.
Well, I can see the benefits of a race like that, but when we're just talking about pure, spectacularness of a race, I'm sure races more like UTMB or a Western States are a little more enjoyable in that sense. Can you talk about maybe one of your favorite ultra marathons that you've done?
Oh, I think it's impossible. They all have really, huge highlights. And then even the low moments now, when I reflect on some of those races, are something I can, think fondly of, because I can grow from those moments. So I don't know. It's been so cool to realize what we can do and how far we can go, and to travel with your feet for 100 miles or 200 miles out in the wilderness, through mountains and stuff is so amazing feeling. And I'm just so thankful that my body and my brain are holding up and letting me experience this adventure.
Yeah. Now, there's so many different types of ultra marathons. As you said, 50K, 100K, 100 mile, 200 mile, and then you've got different obstacles of terrain, and something like Moab is just insane. Is there one ultra marathon in particular that you would classify as one of the toughest, whether it be just from a terrain standpoint, but also just how you felt in it? You just felt kind of destroyed when you were doing it, and you maybe weren't sure if you could finish.
Yeah. Those moments always happen. I think UTMB this past summer was a really tough one. It starts in Chamonix, France, and then it goes around Mont Blanc. So it's 100 miles with, I think, about 30,000 feet of climbing. And it's just tough. It's a tough course. The climbs are hard and technical and mountainous, and there's a lot of competition. So you've got to keep your foot on the gas all the way if you want to stay in it. And I think there I had 50K left. So I had about 30 miles left, and I was totally dead. My legs were gone. I was throwing up. I was overheated, and I was trying to wrap my head around 30 more miles with 3, really big climbs before I could be at the finish line. And that felt crazy for a minute, but then it was also like, well, the only way to get there is to start moving. So stop, dilly-dallying, thinking about it, and just go. And I think that's the coolest part ultras always teach me, is that you can always just keep going and see what happens.
Yeah. And I'm sure one aspect that helped was the fans there. When I talked with Tim Tollefson about this race, he described it as the Super Bowl of ultramarathon running. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, it's insane. And I know track runners and a lot of the road races have packed stadiums or, roads lined with people. But a lot of times these ultras are just you by yourself out in the middle of nowhere. And this one is unique in that there are, thousands and thousands of fans in all these little towns in the Alps as you're going around the course. And then the finish line is insane.
Yeah. It's on my bucket list to get out there for that race, just because of how spectacular it is. And when we were following Tim, when he was getting ready for UTMB, he was doing a lot of miles. He was really ready to run the race of his life. He got out there, he fell, injured his leg. has anything like that ever happened to you? And how do you even prepare for something like that? How do you go forward when things go wrong in an ultra?
Yeah, I think my mindset is always standing at the start line that things are going to go wrong, and that a lot of times maybe you can plan for, some of those things. Some are kind of predictable, and others, like Tim's fall, are things you can't ever predict or plan for. And so you just have to know that something's going to come up that you didn't expect, and try and keep a cool head as you deal with it and assess your options. So figuring out a way to continue forward, or deciding to pull a plug if it feels like unhealthy or irresponsible to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. You can prep only so much before the race. And at the end of the day, you kind of just have to do it and see what happens.
Yeah. And that's the fun of it too, is you just don't know what wrenches are going to be thrown in, and how you deal with them is often huge in how you end up doing in the race.
Yeah. Well, one thing that you can prepare a little bit for is your nutrition. And I know all ultra runners kind of find what works for them, however many calories they need, if they go gel, if they go hard food. What is your strategy when you're racing, and does it vary depending on how far you're going?
It took me a lot of years to narrow down my foods that I take in, but now I've got it into a very small group that I love, because it takes out a lot of the thinking. So if it's less than 100K, I'll do just Tailwind and Honey Stinger chews and waffles. I'm not a gel person. If it is 100K to 100 miles, then I add in mashed potatoes to that equation. And if it's over 100 miles, it's that equation plus really anything else goes. So when the races are getting up to 200 miles or over, I start to need some real food, and I go for like pizza, pierogies. I've had a McDonald's cheeseburger during a race, like
Wow.
anything to tide me over.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, otherwise I keep it a very, very small group of foods.
Okay. Yeah. And I think when you start talking about some of those, like a cheeseburger, that sounds crazy to someone, but when you need that fuel, you need the fuel. So it makes sense. Now, when you finish the race, I'm sure things are a little bit different. What's your go-to food when it comes to post-race? Are we looking at a lot of nachos? I know that's a favorite.
Yeah, pretty much immediately after crossing the finish line, if possible, I'm going to have a beer, at least one, and then nachos as soon as my stomach calms down and feels like taking in food again.
Yeah. Well, and I think for runners, a lot of times you hear people like Michael Phelps or swimmers doing crazy amounts of calories a day. For someone like you who is running large amounts of miles each day, what's the normal calorie intake looking like?
I have no idea.
No. That's interesting because I think a lot of people think that like you're on this strict diet, but like how do you go about fueling yourself on a day-to-day basis? Is it mainly just kind of when you're hungry, you eat?
Yeah, it's exactly that. I'm not a huge foodie, and I don't want to exert energy to count calories or to worry about that kind of stuff. So I eat what I'm craving or what's convenient, and I eat when I'm hungry, and it kind of, ebbs and flows with if I'm, putting in a really big day or a really big week, maybe I'm craving different things or I'm eating different amounts, but just tuning in and trying to react to what my body's asking for is my nutrition plan for life.
Nice. Well, when we look at races upcoming in the future, it looks like things are going to be postponed a little bit. How has the coronavirus affected your day-to-day training, and are you looking towards races in the future, or right now are you kind of just focused on, one day at a time?
Yeah, in Colorado, our trails were never shut down and we were never restricted for how much time we could spend outside. So fortunately, my training has been able to carry on almost as normal. Races have been canceled now all the way out through June. So just waiting to hear on some of those summer races, July and August. If there's no races though, I have no problem, doing big adventures this summer or continuing to just keep training and building up that base so that when they do happen, I'm ready to rumble. I haven't had a huge problem with motivation with everything getting canceled, which I know has been at the front of a lot of people's minds as they lose sight of their purpose of why they're doing this still.
Yeah. Yeah. I think motivation is definitely something that everyone's being affected by, but it's good to hear that you're still running, you're still getting those miles in. And when the races do eventually open up, I know you're going to be ready. So whether it be 100-mile or a 200-mile, I can guarantee you're going to be up at the top, ready to go. So
oh, thank you. We'll see.
well, when we talk about a 100-mile race or a 200-mile race, for some people, 100 miles seems just unreasonable. And then doubling that to 200, to me, I don't understand how you could ever get there. What is the difference between a 100-mile and 200-mile race?
100-mile difference.
So let's say, when you get to 100 miles, when you finish 100 miles, what is going through your head, and how do you even wrap around that's only halfway? Because to me, it just seems like the amount of time is just most people aren't able to realize how much time that is on your feet.
Yeah, I think, I'm no expert, but I'm trying to keep learning how to do these 200s better and more efficiently. I think for me, it's been important standing on the start line of a 200-mile race to not think of the halfway point as being 100 miles and to just take it section by section and 20 miles at a time or whatever it is. And I think another piece of it is being just aware that this is going to take days. And during those days, your only job is to keep running and taking in calories. And when you think of it like that, like, whoa, how lucky is it that this is all I have to do now for 2 or 3 or 4 days? Like, that's kind of cool. So taking it as the adventure that it is and not being overwhelmed by the distance.
Yeah. And when we look at one of the most popular 200-plus-mile races, Moab is up there. Can you talk about that course? And I was bringing up videos of it. It's like unreal to see just the terrain that you get to run through. What is that like?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's out in Moab, Utah, and it goes through like canyon lands and different desert areas, but it also gets up into the LaSalle mountain range, which is a pretty legit mountain range right by Moab. So you have a ton of variety of terrain and views that, you can only dream up in other, days. And I don't know, you end up getting out in the middle of nowhere. Like, I remember running this desert section there where I looked around and it was just me and these red rocks and red sand and these canyon walls. There weren't even birds or insects. Like, no one else wants to live out there. And that was pretty special feeling to be using your feet to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you talk about kind of being out in the middle of nowhere, I saw this one video of these crazy downhill sections with like these cliff faces that if you make one wrong step, like, you're done. Does that ever go through your head, or are you just so in the zone that you've just got one goal in mind and you're not even thinking about, because even for someone who's just, maybe walking it, I'd be a little worried, and you're 100 miles into the race and still going down these crazy sections.
Yeah. There's some courses that are they have some really technical sections or really exposed cliff edges that you're running on. And I think not panicking and not, being overwhelmed by it is important, and to keep going forward, but also to be aware of your surroundings and to not take a misstep like that.
Yeah. And when you talk about being aware of your surroundings, How are you able to be aware of your surroundings when you are 200 miles into a race? You don't have a lot of sleep. Has that ever affected you near the end of a race?
Yeah, for sure. I have been falling asleep while running and have had quite a few hallucinations out on the trails. So your brain gets a little bit crazy after that many days.
What's the craziest thing you've ever seen on one of these in near the end of one of these races when you talk about hallucinations and falling
Yeah.
asleep?
I saw a leopard in a hammock. So it was just like lounging on the side of the trail. I've seen a guy playing a cello. I saw these puppets on a swing set.
Oh,
That one was weird. Yeah. One time it was just white cats all over the ground. And so as I was running, I was like tiptoeing to try not to step on them.
oh my gosh. So in your head, you're not even like you're so just uh in this race that you're not even in your head thinking like, oh, I'm hallucinating this. Like it almost feels real.
Yeah, well, they look pretty real.
Wow. It's hard to even imagine going through that much pain and to get to that point. So I commend you on that. I mean, I don't know if majority of, the world will ever experience something as crazy as that. So that's
Well, it
crazy.
doesn't have to be 200 miles. Like just trying a little bit farther than you've ever gone before is a cool challenge. I think that everyone can, jump into.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting about hearing about your experiences in these races, but a lot of our fans are big shoe people. They love hearing the tech details. They love hearing why you use certain shoes. What is your current lineup looking like? I know you're a Solomon athlete, so I'm sure you have a pretty big range of shoes that vary between your training and your races. What's your current lineup looking like?
Yeah, there's a new Sense Ride 3 out this year that I've been putting through the ringer pretty well here in Colorado. And it's an amazing trail shoe for every type of terrain, really. But it's also been my go-to for if I don't know what I'm doing when I leave my house. And I've, then ended up on the roads with it and it's fine, or on just kind of crushed gravel paths with it, and I still love it. So that one's pretty versatile, and I'm loving it for that reason. I also use the S-Lab Ultra 2 a lot during races. I think every race I did last year, I used that shoe, and it's comfortable and lightweight and has the grip for the trails, and also lasts for, a 200-mile race without any hot spots or stuff like that. So I usually get pretty attached to like specific shoes that I learn to trust and that I know are comfortable after a lot of hours, and then I just stick with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you're going as far and as long as you are, you want to make sure you have a reliable shoe that's going to get you through to the end. Now, I want to kind of go back because I want to dive a little bit deeper into each of these shoes. So Sense Ride 3, I've used that shoe, very versatile. And what I love about that shoe is you get great performance, but the price point is amazing. It's simple. I think it's a very underrated shoe because you've got so many shoes from Solomon that are a little higher end that maybe some people might lean to, but the Sense Ride is just, as you said, extremely versatile. So I think that is an overlooked shoe.
Yeah, I'm loving it for that. And yeah, it is just simple, and it gets you exactly what you need to go anywhere. So I think it's a great shoe for any level, someone just getting into exploring the trails or someone who runs trails every single day. It's awesome for that.
Yeah. Now we move on now to your S-Lab Ultra 2, your go-to racing shoe. And I think S-Lab is the shoe when we think of Solomon. A lot of people love that because it's kind of that highest end performance race day, has all the bells and whistles. And the Ultra 2 is a fantastic shoe. It was built to go long, far, and be just light enough. Do you have any experience in the previous version of the S-Lab Ultra? Was that a shoe that you used, or did you kind of start using it in the newer version when they kind of beefed up the midsole a little bit?
Yeah, I probably used it a little bit in that first version of it, but definitely dialed up my usage when it was the second version.
Yeah.
And yeah, took it on many adventures last year and loved it.
Yeah, I think both the original Ultra and now the S5 Ultra 2 have been favorites of fans, and they're a little bit different, but I like the newer one because of it is a little bit more beefed up and it's built for the ultra marathon. And when you're going 100 miles, 200 miles, you want to make sure you have the cushioning under your foot that you're going to feel good, mile after mile. So
Yeah.
that is a favorite of mine. When we start looking at very technical trail races, is there any shoe, like, will you use a speed cross? Is there ever a time you need something with a lot of lugs?
Not really in the races that I do. I love those and have taken them out, and yeah, feel really confident on some of those crazy technical sections. But the races I gravitate towards right now are those really long ones, and often those I would choose cushion over the giant grippy lugs for just the amount of hours that I'm in them.
Yeah. And when we talk about cushioning, right now, if we look kind of towards the marathon world, high cushion racing shoes, stuff like the Nike Vaporfly, you're seeing things like Saucony Endorphin Pro. There's these highly cushioned shoes that are using lightweight PIBA related midsoles and carbon fiber plates. Carbon fiber plates is a hot topic right now on the road side. It hasn't really transitioned over to the trail yet. Is that something that you see coming in the future?
Oh man, I have no idea. I I know there's lots of smart people who are coming up with cool ways to put together shoes, but I have no prediction of if that type will hit the trails or if it would even be effective on
Yeah,
rocky trails where your foot needs to land in every direction all the
yeah,
time. So I don't know. We'll see. It's cool. It's a cool time to yeah, see all this innovation, I guess.
yeah. I think that's when I talk with a lot of people about kind of predictions of where carbon fiber plate stuff is going. It always comes back to it's a great time to be a runner right now because there are so many great options. If Solomon has something in the works, would you consider trying out a carbon fiber plate shoe?
If they were working on something, yeah, I mean, I have no idea what it even feels like. I don't really understand, like, yeah. I've never put my foot in one, so I've never felt that whatever it feels like. So I don't really know what the hype is about yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it is going to be a little more prominent on the roads. We're seeing it in the marathon, but if Solomon comes up with something, I would love to get your input down the road because I think there's just right now the opportunity is endless in technology, and I love to see times go down, and that is one way we could maybe see that happen.
It's
But
pretty crazy.
it's crazy times, crazy times. Now, we're talking future of shoes. Let's kind of take a step back. What are some of your favorite Solomon running shoes that you've used over the years?
I think the two I said for sure. And I've also worn the Ultra Pro quite a bit, which is, I guess, similar to the S Lab Ultra in that it's built for the long haul, but a little bit like more, I would say even more cushion in that one.
Yeah.
I wore that one for the Tahoe 200 last year, and my feet were super happy during the entire thing. So
Yeah. And that's interesting to hear that you picked that for a certain ultra marathon because I imagine depending on what race, what conditions, how your body's feeling is going to make a difference for the shoe you end up choosing on race day.
yeah, for sure. And usually I'll have it dialed in, beforehand on what I'm going to wear and just feel confident going into the race that that's the right choice. So I'm not doing any like last minute hemming and hawing over it. I usually just go with whatever I picked and trust that it'll be great for it.
Yeah. Okay, well, it was great to hear your thoughts on shoes, but I want to move it on to what the fans have been waiting for, the fan questions. Now, we reached out on Instagram, got some people's hard-pressing questions, and we're going
Oh
to ask them
boy.
right now. So, question number one is, what was your first ultramarathon experience?
I did a 50K race in Texas. So it was right near San Antonio, Texas. And it was probably like 3 or 4 laps in this local park. And I thought it was so cool to be out doing this thing for the day and just running in the woods again. And it definitely made me want to look for, what else there was in this ultra running world, what other distances I could try.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy to think that one race was what started it all, and you probably would have never thought at that time that you were going to do as many races as you've done today and be as successful. So that's crazy to hear.
Yeah, I had no idea. I didn't know the ultra running world existed, so it was a fun thing to stumble across.
How did that race go? When you finished that race, did you run pretty well, and was it pretty obvious early on that you were going to have success in the ultra field?
It was a pretty small local race, so I think for me, I was super sore after running it, but I remember, being in disbelief that I could make it 31 miles and then getting on Google and looking through, what else there was out there. What's the next thing I can try? And that was a 50-mile race. So just sort of snowballed from there.
Yeah. Yeah. It always goes more and more. You always got to push those limits. So.
Yeah.
Well, talking about pushing the limits, next question is in regards to the Tahoe 200. What was your favorite view from the race?
Oh man.
Because I know that's a very spectacular race.
It's incredible. It goes around Lake Tahoe. So in California and Nevada, mostly on the Tahoe Rim Trail, but it diverts off it for a little bit. And there were just monster views of that lake from every direction, which was so cool. I think one of my favorite parts was actually in the dark on the east side of it. You do these like huge exposed climbs, and it was amazing. We stopped and turned off our headlamps so that, all you saw were stars and the reflection of this lake down there. And I imagine in the daylight, it's really spectacular. So I'd love to get back out and see that again.
Yeah. All right. The next question, this is a heavy hitter. I think this could be the question of the day.
Oh boy.
What is your favorite nacho topping?
Such a good question. I play around with my nacho toppings, but it's always grated cheese, not the liquid cheese. And then I prefer spicy, so jalapenos or some sort of poblanos or any sort of spicy peppers on there, and some pico de gallo is a very basic, simple combo that's very good.
Would you consider yourself a nacho connoisseur?
I mean, I don't want to like get crazy, but a little bit.
Now, do you mainly make your own nachos, or are you the type who like to explore out to different restaurants and find like the best nachos available?
I don't usually make my own. I have been quite a bit during this quarantine life. But yeah, usually at a restaurant or a brewery or food truck, there's often a nacho option, and then you've got to try it and see.
Yeah, and I know you're a fan of breweries, and when I was doing a little research, I saw something about Sufferfest. Can you explain what that is and what your role with that company is?
Yeah, Sufferfest is a beer company out of California, and they make beer that you taste great after suffering. So, the beer you want to crack after a big adventure and share with friends while you rehash the day. So they've been great support of me and my running and my beer drinking. And they've got some really delicious flavors to try. So look them up if you like beer and see what they've got near you.
Wow. Yeah, our in-house video specialist, whenever we go traveling around, he's always looking at the craziest flavors of beer. So I'm sure he would also enjoy that. What would you say is your favorite flavor that they have?
Oh man. So in the winter, they've got a really great stout called Head Start, and it's like coconut and coffee flavors in it. That's just smooth in the cold weather. But I've just been sampling some of their newer flavors for the summer, and they've got a Kolsch that has cayenne and honey in it, which paired really well with my nachos the other day.
I bet that sounds good. All right. Well, the final fan question, and when I saw this question, it reminded me of one of my favorite movies, so I had to ask it. When are you going to do the Barkley Marathon?
Wait, which one is your favorite movie?
I didn't know. Is there multiple Barkley Marathon movies?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know
There's
that.
a few different documentaries out there,
Okay.
but they're all fantastic. So you could dive down that YouTube rabbit hole later and check them out.
Well, before you even dive into that question, can you explain what the Barkley Marathon is? Because I don't think everyone knows how just insane that race is.
Yeah, I can do my best. I've never done it. Barely anyone has finished it. I think in all the years that it's been put on, only 15 finishers, I think, have made it the whole way. So it's roughly 100 miles, but it's an unmarked course out in the hills and woods of Tennessee near this prison. And the race director, his name is Laz, he hides books out on the course beforehand. And in order to prove that you ran the whole mapped course each lap, you have to collect these book pages. So it's like a navigation race mixed with a 100-mile race, mixed with a lot of elements of, yeah. I mean, I think they've had snow, they've had hail, they've had a ton of crazy weather during this race.
Wow. Now, is that something that you think you would be able or are interested in doing and think you maybe could finish it?
Oh, I'm absolutely interested. It sounds like a really cool challenge. I have no idea if I could finish it, but I think it'd be worth trying and seeing. It's another way to test your limits, you know?
Wow. Yeah, and I know one of the biggest issues with that race is maybe just like getting into the race. So maybe in the future, if things start getting back to normal and you get an entry, we maybe will see you on the starting line.
Yeah, that would be really cool. We'll see.
Awesome. Well, that's all the fan questions I have for you. It's been awesome to hear the stories, your shoe selection, your nacho expertise. If people want to find out a little bit more about you, where can they find you?
On Instagram at Courtney Dauwalter, on Twitter at Court Dauwalter, and Facebook is Courtney Dauwalter.
Perfect. Simple enough.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you've been one of our top requests for people to get on this show. So it's an honor to have you here.
Well, thank you. It was awesome chatting with you.
Perfect. Well, hopefully once things start getting back to normal, we can have you out here in SLO, show you around on the trails, make some awesome video content. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And get you signing up for your first ultra.
Yes, we full circle, you know.
Let's bring it back.
You know, I was a little weary at first, but I might just have to give it a shot. You know, I got to get a marathon in first, but the ultra marathon, I think, is definitely going to happen one of these days. So
I love it. That's so cool.
Well, thanks again. And there you have it. That was episode 6 of the Running Warehouse Connection.